It's also important to bear in mind that the last 4 years have been very important. It might not be the shiny, glitzy kind of security assistance one would like to see in a place like Lebanon from the Lebanese side. But the Lebanese are also cognizant of the fact that if they want to have mobility, if they want to navigate challenging terrain, if they want to have good training, if they want to have a meaningful long-term process that could potentially yield dividends, the only way to go is the United States. And that's why, in terms of the procurement process and the overall command and control of the LAF, they have really put their eggs in the US basket in terms of long-term military planning. Other countries are either unwilling, unable, or unreliable. The LAF is fundamentally an emerging military force. It has NATO SOPs that have been assimilated through training. A lot of attention has been given to Syrian training in the past and what the impact is. Yes, there continues to be training in Syria. There are regiments that continue to do so. There is a bilateral relationship. But there's also training in France, the UK, and so on. But fundamentally, the LAF's approach to military development, its approach to its SOPs and rules of engagement are NATO-derived. Increasing LAF capabilities and holdings promotes a stronger role in Lebanon and a positive security spillover. For someone like myself who looks at the power balance in Lebanon and the region, it's almost a no-brainer. The military has a uniquely high cross-sectarian approval rating. We have not leveraged that yet in the way that we could in terms of its role in the country. Then you come back to the question of whether the political sphere can absorb such a development. The LAF is also a case study for development in terms of an emerging military with a mix of multi-purpose light systems that fit a very, very specific purpose. For example, the LAF want to get a aerobatic close air support capable platform that can also do border management, counterterrorism, and data collection. Now, the cons of U.S. assistance, first of all, the U.S. security assistance and security cooperation community are geared towards overlapping orders and agreements. You have to have a lot of things happening over a number of years to see this as a continuing flow, as a long-term process. And Lebanon is just at the beginning of this, unfortunately. Even though it's been 4 years, 5 years, it's still very much in the infancy. There's also the impact of Lebanese civil-military relations. The political sphere and the LAF don't have a common language. And even within the LAF, there isn't really a common language about where they're going as an institution yet. So that also holds back what the U.S. can and cannot do in terms of military assistance. Also, U.S. assistance cannot build the LAF alone. The current 5-year plan for the LAF is about $1.1 billion, just for U.S. procurement. But the reality is that for a lot of the systems the LAF wants, it will have to go direct commercial sales on the international market, but national funding has to be also available. While a U.S. security assistance and cooperation process exists, it's arguable that there isn't an underlying long-term, end-state-driven strategic vision for Lebanon from the United States. The process works, the LAF works, but how to instrumentalize Lebanon in order to fit within regional imperatives in the region, that has been the unanswered question for 60, 70 years. And that's not going to change, and it's too difficult for the security assistance community to do so. U.S. assistance is also limited by U.S. foreign policy prerogatives. The LAF ultimately wants certain kinds of systems that congressional blockages and U.S. policy overall will not allow, at least not within a short term. Ultimately, the regional dimension trumps how much assistance the U.S. can give to Lebanon. We're going to close, because I've already gotten my 5-minute note. 5 minutes ago. Post-September 11, 2001 paradigm is insufficient to chart course on Lebanese military development. It ignores the history of civil-military relations in Lebanon. It does not pay sufficient attention to why the Lebanese political sphere is where it is, why it views the military the way it does, and where the civilians and the military fit in terms of the long-term course for military development. U.S. regional imperatives and foreign policy positions also place varying limits. We discussed that. The bureaucratic process is also important, and there is a limited U.S. ability to mobilize Lebanon. Everything else that I've said you've pretty much covered in this discussion. So I'll stop at that and give it to David.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that detailed analysis. David Schenker, please.
Well, it's tough going after Aram. He covered some of the things I was going to cover. in any event, I'll start with a little history. The U.S. government has a long-standing military-to-military relationship with the government of Lebanon. You have the financial aspect. Between 1946 and 1980, Washington provided $110 million roughly in loans to the government, to the LAF, and $14 million in grant aid, in addition to $3 million in IMET. For most of the years of the Civil War and during the Syrian occupation, the bilateral connection between the U.S. and Lebanese militaries was largely comprised of IMET, hovering in the range of about $500,000 per year, but oftentimes augmented by the Lebanese armed forces. We also have a history of boots on the ground. As Aram said, 1958, you had 14,000 U.S. Marines landed in Lebanon at the request of the government of Lebanon. In the aftermath of the slaughter of the Hashemites in Iraq, the rise of Nasserism, the establishment of the United Arab Republic was seen as a real threat to U.S. interests in the region, and the fear of the domino effect. In a case of deja vu, at the time, the UN also dispatched observers to Lebanon, to the border, to, quote-unquote, ensure that further outside Syrian assistance to the insurrection in Lebanon would cease. It was already happening in 1958. As then President Eisenhower said at the time in justifying the Marines' deployment, more will be required than a team of UN observers now in Lebanon. He also had 1982-83, of course, a deployment as part of the multinational force that ended with the 83 attack on the Marine Corps barracks. And significantly, more recently, the support for the nearly 3-month war in Nahr al-Bared that started in May 2007. In the initial days of the fighting, the LAF burned through an estimated, well, I've seen different figures here, but between 30 and 50% of its total ammunition stock. Is that right, Dave? Give or take. And the U.S. responded with an emergency airlift of 40 C-17 aircraft brimming with ammunition and systems. This was no small feat for those of you who know about the FMS process, and the U.S. government was incredibly creative in using an AXA agreement, I believe, to get this done. As Aram noted, Lebanon is not important in of itself for the United States. It has no resources. It's more of an issue of the regional security dimension. There's no objective requirements for the United States government in Lebanon, but it's become more important recently because of the regional proxy battle between Iran and its surrogates and the United States and its friends in the region. From the 1989 TIPH agreement on, and particularly after 1991, Washington increasingly viewed Lebanon and its relations with the LAF through the prism of Syria. During this time, in terms of the national role for the LAF, the U.S. actually undermined it. In 1996, for example, then Secretary of State Warren Christopher brokered what's now known as the Red Line Agreement between Hezbollah and Israel. I could talk about that later, but this, in effect, this agreement elevated Hezbollah to the level of state actor, undermining the role of the LAF. During the 1990s and through 2005, successive U.S. administrations declined to provide military assistance to the LAF. There was just no need for it. Frankly, it was an afterthought for U.S. officials. Syria was occupied by Lebanon. The LAF. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Syria occupied Lebanon. And the LAF was, and maybe it's an oversimplification, but largely reduced to